I sat at the Christmas dinner table watching my sister Madison tear open an envelope containing first-class tickets to Paris, while my brother Tyler admired his brand-new Rolex. When I opened my gift, I found a crumpled paper bag filled with expired grocery store coupons from 2 years ago. My mother, Patricia, coldly stated that I never really put in the effort like my siblings did. I forced a laugh, but inside I was devastated. That night, I made a decision that would change everything forever. The drive back to my cramped studio apartment felt like the longest 20 minutes of my life. The image of Madison squealing with joy over her Paris vacation kept replaying in my mind, followed by Tyler's satisfied grin as he fastened that gleaming Rolex around his wrist. Then there was me, Jonathan, holding a grocery bag containing coupons for products I couldn't even afford when they were valid. Sleep refused to come that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard my mother's voice cutting through the Christmas warmth like a blade. "Well, you never really put in the effort." The words echoed in my small room, bouncing off the second-hand furniture and water-stained walls that had become my reality since graduating college 3 years ago. Something deep inside me refused to accept that explanation anymore. I'd been working 2 jobs since I turned 18. Every morning I clocked in at the warehouse by 6 loading trucks and managing inventory until 3 in the afternoon. Then I'd grab a quick sandwich and head to my weekend handyman business, fixing leaky faucets and painting rooms until well past sunset. I'd put myself through community college with student loans that still haunted my credit score, while Madison's university education had somehow been covered entirely. Around 3 in the morning, I found myself digging through a dusty cardboard box that had been sitting unopened in my closet since my father passed away 5 years ago. Dad had always been the peacemaker in our family, the one who made sure everyone felt included and valued. His sudden heart attack had left a void that seemed to grow larger each year, especially during holidays. My hands trembled as I pulled out yellow documents and faded photographs. There were his old tax returns insurance papers, and then something that made my breath catch in my throat. A copy of his last will and testament along with financial records I'd never seen before. According to these papers, my father had left me a substantial inheritance of $300,000 that was supposed to be held in trust by my mother until I turned 25. I was now 28 years old, and I'd never seen a single penny of that money. The bank statements attached to the will showed a trust account in my name that had been established shortly after Dad's funeral. But as I traced the transaction history with my finger, a horrifying pattern emerged. Regular withdrawals had been made over the past 3 years, each one authorized by Patricia as the trustee. The amounts were staggering. $8,000 withdrawn in November labeled travel expenses. That had to be Madison's Paris trip. $4,000 in September marked as personal items. Tyler's Rolex. $12,000 the previous spring noted as educational costs. Madison's final semester tuition that she'd bragged about having fully covered. My throat felt dry as I continued reading. $22,000 for home improvements coincided perfectly with the timeline of our mother's kitchen renovation. $15,000 marked transportation assistance, matched exactly when Tyler had somehow afforded the down payment on his new pickup truck. Every major purchase my family had made in recent years, every luxury they enjoyed, while I scraped together rent money and survived on ramen noodles, had been funded by my own inheritance. The money my father had specifically set aside to help me build a stable future had been systematically stolen to fund everyone else's comfort. I spent the rest of the night hunched over my laptop researching trust fund laws and fiduciary responsibilities. The legal websites painted a clear picture. What Patricia had done wasn't just morally wrong, it was criminal theft. As the trustee, she had a legal obligation to use that money solely for my benefit until I reached the age specified in the trust agreement. By the time dawn light filtered through my apartment's single window, I had printed out copies of every relevant document and begun formulating a plan. The expired coupons hadn't just been thoughtless or cruel. They had been an insult delivered by a woman who was actively stealing from me while positioning herself as the generous provider to my siblings. I thought about all the times I'd felt guilty for not being able to afford nice gifts for Madison and Tyler's birthdays. All the family gatherings where I'd sat quietly while they discussed their latest purchases and opportunities, wondering why I couldn't seem to get ahead despite working constantly. The shame I'd carried for years, believing I was somehow deficient compared to my successful siblings, began transforming into something else entirely. Righteous anger burned in my chest as I realized the scope of the deception. This wasn't just about money. Patricia had been orchestrating my exclusion from family prosperity while using my own inheritance to elevate Madison and Tyler. She had turned me into the family failure while secretly funding everyone else's success story. The warehouse shift started in 2 hours, but I called in sick for the first time in over a year. Today, I was going to start fighting back, and I needed every minute to build my case properly. The truth was finally coming to light, and I intended to make sure it shined bright enough for everyone to see. I arrived at First National Bank when the doors opened at 9 sharp, armed with my father's original will, my birth certificate, and a righteous determination that surprised even me. The morning receptionist directed me to Mrs. Helen Henderson, a silver-haired woman who had worked in trust administration for over 2 decades. When I explained my situation and showed her the documents, Mrs. Henderson's professional demeanor shifted to one of genuine concern. She remembered my father fondly describing him as a thoughtful man who had been very specific about protecting his youngest son's future. Her fingers moved quickly across her computer keyboard as she pulled up the complete transaction history for my trust account. The screen displayed a devastating timeline that was even worse than what I'd discovered in those late-night documents. Mrs. Henderson's face grew increasingly troubled as she scrolled through months of unauthorized withdrawals, each one carefully crafted to appear legitimate on the surface. "Your mother has been making these withdrawals for 3 years," she explained, her voice tight with disapproval. "Each time she presents documentation, claiming these are for your living expenses, educational costs, or financial emergencies. She told us you were going through difficult periods and needed careful financial guidance." The betrayal cut deeper than I had imagined possible. Patricia hadn't just stolen my money. She had created an elaborate fiction about my character to justify her theft. According to the bank's records, I was portrayed as someone who couldn't be trusted with his own inheritance, someone who needed his mother's intervention to prevent financial disaster. Mrs. Henderson clicked through several more screens, revealing additional information that made my stomach turn. "She often brought your siblings with her during these visits, introducing them as her successful children, while explaining that you were going through rehabilitation or therapy. She painted a picture of a young man who had specifically requested that his inheritance be used to help his more responsible siblings instead." I sat in stunned silence, processing the calculated nature of my mother's deception. She hadn't just robbed me. She had poisoned my relationship with Madison and Tyler by creating a narrative where I was the damaged one who needed protection from himself. My siblings genuinely believed they were helping me by excluding me from financial discussions and accepting expensive gifts without question. Mrs. Henderson printed out a complete transaction history and account summary, her expression sympathetic but professional. "Mr. Cooper, what your mother has done constitutes a serious breach of fiduciary duty. Trust funds are not discretionary spending accounts for trustees. This money was legally yours the moment you turned 25. Armed with this evidence, I drove directly to Madison's apartment complex across town. I found both her and Tyler lounging on her balcony, still basking in the afterglow of their Christmas windfall. Madison was scrolling through Parisian hotel websites on her laptop while Tyler polished his new Rolex with a soft cloth. I forced myself to appear calm and casual as I apologized for seeming distant during dinner. I've been thinking about what Mom said yesterday, and I realize I might have been too focused on work to appreciate how much she does for our family. I began hating every word of the lie but needing information. Madison immediately warmed up, relieved that I wasn't going to cause drama about the gift disparity. Jonathan, I'm so glad you're not upset about Christmas. Mom explained everything to us years ago about why she handles your finances differently. My heart pounded as I carefully probed for details. What do you mean, handles them differently? Tyler leaned forward, his expression genuinely caring but misguided. She told us about your gambling problems and how you asked the family not to give you money directly. She said it was part of your recovery program or something. The words hit me like a physical blow. Gambling problems. Recovery program. I had never placed a bet in my life beyond an occasional lottery ticket, and the only thing I was recovering from was years of financial struggle, while my inheritance funded everyone else's lifestyle. Madison nodded earnestly, her voice full of sisterly concern. Mom said you specifically requested that Dad's inheritance money be used to help Tyler and me succeed, instead of being wasted on your addiction. She's been so proud of how thoughtful you were to put our futures ahead of your own recovery. I managed to keep my expression neutral while my world crumbled around me. Patricia had crafted a story that painted her as the protective mother and me, as the selfless but troubled son who wanted his siblings to benefit from his sacrifice. It was a masterpiece of manipulation that explained every luxury they enjoyed while keeping them grateful and unquestioning. It's really thoughtful of her to explain things that way. I managed my voice strained with the effort of maintaining the charade. I appreciate you both understanding my situation. Tyler stood up and clapped me on the shoulder with genuine affection. We're proud of you for working so hard on yourself, man. And we know that when you're ready, Mom will make sure you're taken care of too. I left their apartment feeling like I'd been hollowed out from the inside. The theft was devastating, but the character assassination was almost worse. My mother hadn't just stolen my money, she had stolen my siblings' respect and trust, replacing it with pity and misguided admiration for a fictional version of events. The drive home blurred past as I grappled with the magnitude of the deception. Patricia had spent years building a narrative where she was the wise, generous matriarch managing a crisis. Madison and Tyler were the grateful beneficiaries of her careful planning, and I was the damaged but selfless family member whose problems justified everything. My phone buzzed with a text message from Madison. Thanks for being so understanding about everything. We love you, and we're here for you when you're ready to accept help. I stared at that message for a long time, feeling the weight of years of manipulation pressing down on me. My siblings weren't cruel or greedy people. They were victims of Patricia's lies just as much as I was, but their victimization came with luxury vacations and expensive gifts, while mine came with expired coupons and condescension. That night, I began planning my next move. Confronting Patricia directly might feel satisfying, but she had years of experience manipulating situations to her advantage. I needed professional help and legal backing if I was going to expose this web of lies and reclaim what was rightfully mine. The truth was finally coming together, but untangling Patricia's deception was going to require more than just righteous anger. It was going to require strategy, patience, and the kind of courage I wasn't sure I possessed. But one thing was certain: I couldn't let this continue any longer. 3 days after my conversation with Madison and Tyler, I sat in my car outside the family home for 20 minutes, gathering the courage to walk through that front door. The manila folder on my passenger seat contained bank statements, legal documents, and printed emails that painted an undeniable picture of theft and fraud. My hands shook slightly as I reviewed the evidence one final time. The house looked exactly the same as it had during Christmas dinner, but something felt different now. The white colonial with its perfectly manicured lawn and recent kitchen renovation no longer represented family warmth and stability. Instead, it stood as a monument to my stolen future, built and maintained with money that should have been securing my own foundation. I found Patricia in the kitchen, methodically loading the dishwasher with china from last night's dinner party. She hummed softly while arranging crystal glasses with the careful precision of someone who took pride in maintaining appearances. The sight of her acting so normal after everything I'd discovered filled me with a rage that took every ounce of self-control to contain. "Mom, we need to talk about Dad's trust fund," I said, placing the folder on the granite countertop that my inheritance money had purchased. The humming stopped immediately. Patricia's back stiffened, but she didn't turn around for several long seconds. When she finally faced me, her expression had transformed from domestic contentment to cold calculation. There was no surprise in her eyes, no confusion about what I might have discovered. She knew exactly why I was there. "I don't know what you think you've found, Jonathan, but you're clearly confused about something," she said, her voice steady, but lacking its usual maternal warmth. I opened the folder and spread the bank statements across her expensive counter. "I'm confused about how $300,000 of my inheritance has been systematically withdrawn from my trust fund over the past 3 years. I'm confused about how Madison's college tuition and Tyler's truck down payment came from my account while I struggled to pay rent." Patricia glanced at the documents without picking them up, her lips pressed into a thin line. "Those withdrawals were perfectly legitimate. I've been supporting you financially for years, even though you've never shown proper appreciation." The audacity of her response caught me off guard. She wasn't even trying to deny the theft. Instead, she was attempting to reframe it as some kind of favor she'd done for me. "Supporting me?" I laughed bitterly. "When exactly did you support me, Mom? When I worked 60-hour weeks to pay for community college? When I ate peanut butter sandwiches for dinner because I couldn't afford groceries? When I gave you expired coupons for Christmas while Madison got a trip to Paris funded by my own money?" Patricia's composure cracked slightly, revealing the calculating mind beneath her maternal facade. "Your father never intended for you to waste that money on your problems. Someone had to make responsible decisions about how it should be used. Dad left that money specifically for me, and you know it. You had no legal right to touch a single dollar of it." I pulled out the original will and trust documents pointing to the clear language that designated me as the sole beneficiary. "This isn't your decision to make." Her laugh was cold and humorless. "Legal right I raised you for 18 years, Jonathan. I fed you, clothed you, and put a roof over your head. That trust fund was simply reimbursement for everything I invested in you before you became such a disappointment." The words stung, but I forced myself to stay focused on the facts. "You're not entitled to reimbursement from my inheritance. You chose to have children, which means you chose to support them. Dad left me this money because he wanted me to have opportunities, not because he owed you anything." Patricia moved closer, her voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "Your father left you that money because I convinced him you'd need extra help. He never thought you'd amount to much on your own, and honestly, neither do I. Madison and Tyler have proven they can make something of themselves. You work in a warehouse and fix toilets. The personal attack was designed to wound me, to make me doubt my worth, and back down from this confrontation. But knowing the truth about my stolen opportunities gave me strength instead of shame. I work in a warehouse because you stole the money Dad left me to start a business or buy a house. I fix toilets because I'm trying to build something with my own hands instead of waiting for handouts. Madison and Tyler succeeded because you gave them my resources while telling them I was too irresponsible to deserve help. Patricia's mask finally slipped completely, revealing the manipulative woman beneath. You have no idea what you're talking about. Madison and Tyler will never believe your ridiculous accusations. I've spent years building their understanding of who you really are. You mean the lies you've told them about gambling problems and recovery programs. I pulled out printed copies of my bank transaction history, showing years of minimum wage deposits with no casino withdrawals or suspicious spending patterns. I've never had an addiction to anything except working myself to death while you robbed me blind. For the first time, uncertainty flickered across Patricia's features. She hadn't expected me to uncover the specific lies she'd told my siblings, and the evidence in front of her made those lies impossible to maintain. Even if you think you can prove something, it won't matter, she said, rallying her defenses. Madison and Tyler trust me completely. If you try to poison them against me with these fantasies, I'll simply tell them you're having a breakdown. I'll say you're desperate for money to feed whatever addiction has finally surfaced. I felt the conversation slipping away from facts and back into her preferred territory of manipulation and character assassination. Patricia had spent years perfecting her ability to control narratives and manage perceptions. A direct confrontation was exactly what she'd been preparing for. I'm not here to negotiate with you about this, I said, gathering the documents back into my folder. I'm here to tell you that I know what you've done, and I'm going to pursue every legal option to get my money back and expose your fraud. Patricia smiled, but there was no warmth in it. Go ahead and try Jonathan. I'll destroy your relationship with your siblings permanently if you pursue this. They'll choose me over you every time, especially when I tell them about your mental breakdown and desperate lies. As if to prove her point, she pulled out her phone and began typing rapidly. Within seconds, I heard the notification sounds of text messages being sent. She turned the screen toward me, showing messages she'd just sent to Madison and Tyler. Jonathan came by today making wild accusations about money. I'm worried about his mental state. He seems to think I owe him something and is getting aggressive about it. Please be careful around him until we can figure out what's wrong. The manipulation was happening in real time right in front of me. Patricia was already beginning to spin this confrontation into evidence of my instability, laying the groundwork for dismissing anything I might tell my siblings later. I stared at her phone screen, feeling a mixture of rage and admiration for her strategic thinking. She had anticipated this moment and prepared for it just like she'd prepared for every other challenge to her authority over the years. You're very good at this. I admitted, my voice quiet but steady. You've had a lot of practice making me look like the problem. Patricia's smile widened. I've had 28 years of practice managing you, Jonathan. Don't think you can suddenly outsmart me now. I walked toward the door, knowing that staying longer would only give her more ammunition to use against me. But as I reached for the handle, I turned back one final time. You're right that you're good at managing situations, Mom. But you made one mistake. You kept detailed records of all your theft, and you committed tax fraud in the process. When this goes to court, it won't matter what story you tell Madison and Tyler. It will only matter what the law says about stealing trust fund money. For the first time in our conversation, Patricia looked genuinely worried. She hadn't considered the legal implications beyond family dynamics, and the mention of tax fraud clearly caught her off guard. I left her standing in that expensive kitchen, surrounded by the luxury my stolen inheritance had purchased, and drove home with a strange sense of relief. The confrontation had gone exactly as badly as I'd expected, but it had also clarified something important. Patricia wasn't going to voluntarily return my money or admit her wrongdoing. If I wanted justice, I was going to have to fight for it properly. The war for my inheritance and my family relationships was just beginning, but at least now I knew exactly what I was fighting against. Finding the right attorney took 3 weeks of consultations and research, but Sarah Brooks came highly recommended for financial fraud cases involving family disputes. Her office occupied the 15th floor of a downtown building, with floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a commanding view of the city, where my inheritance had been systematically stolen. Sarah was a sharp-eyed woman in her 40s who listened intently as I explained my situation, taking detailed notes while reviewing every document I'd brought. When I finished my account, she leaned back in her leather chair and delivered her assessment with the kind of professional directness I'd been hoping to find. Jonathan, your mother has committed multiple serious crimes: breach of fiduciary duty theft, conversion of assets, and based on these tax records, federal fraud as well. We have documentary evidence that would convince any judge or jury. She paused, studying my face carefully. But I need to be clear about something before we proceed. Pursuing this case will likely destroy your relationship with your family permanently. Are you prepared for that outcome? I thought about Madison's excited planning for her Paris vacation, and Tyler's pride in his expensive watch. I thought about years of feeling inadequate and excluded, while my own money funded everyone else's success. Most importantly, I thought about my father's intention to provide me with opportunities that had been stolen before I even knew they existed. My relationship with my family is already destroyed, I told her. It's just been destroyed by lies instead of truth. I'd rather have them hate me for pursuing justice than continue loving a fiction about who I am. Sarah nodded approvingly and began outlining our legal strategy. We would file a civil lawsuit demanding the return of all stolen funds plus interest and damages. Simultaneously, she would forward our evidence to the district attorney's office for potential criminal prosecution. The beauty of this case is that your mother documented everything, Sarah explained, pointing to the bank records. She was so confident in her control over the situation that she kept meticulous records of her theft. She even reported some of these withdrawals as gifts to your siblings on her tax returns, which creates federal tax fraud charges. Within 2 weeks, Patricia received official notification of our lawsuit. Her response was swift and predictable. She hired Theodore Blackwood, an expensive attorney known for handling wealthy clients in family disputes. More importantly, she launched an immediate counteroffensive designed to discredit me and rally family support. The character assassination began with phone calls to extended relatives. Patricia contacted aunts, uncles, and cousins I hadn't spoken to in months, explaining that I was suing her for money she'd spent helping me through addiction recovery. She painted herself as the long-suffering mother being attacked by an ungrateful son who was desperate to fund his gambling habit. Madison and Tyler initially remained neutral, confused by the conflicting accounts but hoping for a peaceful resolution. That changed when Patricia showed them fabricated text message conversations she claimed were from me, begging for money and making threats when refused. Using a secondary phone number, she had created an entire fictional narrative of desperate messages that painted me as unstable and potentially dangerous. The family pressure intensified when Madison started a social media campaign defending our mother. Her Facebook posts described a grieving widow being victimized by a son who couldn't accept responsibility for his own failures. The comments section filled with support from family friends who knew nothing about the real situation, but were eager to offer sympathy and outrage on Patricia's behalf. Tyler's reaction was more direct and considerably more painful. He confronted me at the warehouse during my lunch break, causing a scene in front of my coworkers that nearly cost me my job. His face was red with anger as he accused me of trying to destroy our family over money. Mom sacrificed everything to help you get clean, and this is how you repay her, he shouted, his voice carrying across the loading dock. She's been supporting your sorry life for years while you screwed around with drugs and gambling. I tried to explain the truth about the trust fund theft, but Tyler wasn't interested in hearing evidence or documentation. Patricia's narrative had taken root in his mind, and my lawsuit only confirmed everything she'd told him about my character and motivations. The emotional toll was devastating, but the legal momentum remained strong. Sarah's investigation had uncovered additional evidence that strengthened our case considerably. Patricia's tax records showed that she had reported the large withdrawals from my trust fund as gifts to Madison and Tyler, but she had never filed the required gift tax returns or paid the associated taxes. Gift tax fraud is a federal crime, Sarah explained during one of our weekly strategy meetings. Your mother tried to have it both ways. She justified the withdrawals to the bank as necessary expenses for your care, but then reported them to the IRS as voluntary gifts to your siblings. Both stories can't be true. The tax implications were staggering. Patricia owed thousands of dollars in unpaid gift taxes, plus penalties and interest that had been accumulating for years. The IRS began their own investigation after Sarah forwarded our evidence, adding federal pressure to the civil lawsuit. Within 6 weeks, Patricia received audit notices from both state and federal tax authorities. The financial penalties alone could reach 6 figures, not including potential criminal charges for tax evasion. Her expensive attorney advised immediate settlement to avoid prosecution, but Patricia refused to acknowledge any wrongdoing. Her defiance puzzled even her own legal counsel. Theodore Blackwood was known for his pragmatic approach to family disputes, typically seeking quick resolutions that minimized damage to all parties. Patricia's insistence on fighting a case with overwhelming evidence against her went against every strategic principle he usually employed. During a particularly contentious mediation session, the reason for Patricia's stubbornness became clear. She genuinely believed that her parental authority gave her the right to redistribute family assets as she saw fit. In her mind, the trust fund was just another resource to be managed according to her judgment about which children deserved support. I gave Jonathan 18 years of my life, she declared during the recorded mediation session. I fed him, housed him, and tried to teach him responsibility. If his father wanted to leave him money, it should have been compensation for everything I invested in raising him. Sarah seized on that statement immediately. So, you're admitting that you took money from Jonathan's trust fund for your own purposes. Patricia's attorney tried to intervene, but the damage was done. Her own words had confirmed the intentional nature of the theft, undermining any possible defense based on confusion or good intentions. The case was rapidly becoming unwinnable for Patricia's side. Bank records, tax documents, and her own statements created an overwhelming body of evidence supporting our claims. Her attorney began pressuring her to consider settlement offers before the situation deteriorated further. But I had learned something important about my mother during this process. Patricia didn't just want control over the money. She wanted validation for her actions. Settling the case would require her to admit wrongdoing, which threatened the carefully constructed narrative she'd built about being the wise family matriarch protecting everyone from my failures. As we prepared for what looked like an inevitable trial, I wondered whether Patricia would continue fighting even when defeat was certain. Her need to maintain the fiction of her righteousness seemed stronger than any rational consideration of consequences. The legal machinery ground forward inexorably, but the personal cost continued mounting. I had gained detailed knowledge of exactly how my inheritance had been stolen, but I was losing my family relationships in the process of trying to recover it. Justice was within reach, but I was beginning to understand that some victories come with prices that are almost too high to bear. The breakthrough, in our case, came from an unexpected source, and in a way that changed everything I thought I knew about family loyalty. Madison had spent 3 weeks helping Patricia organize documents for the upcoming trial, a process that involved sorting through years of financial records and correspondence stored in our mother's home office. It was during this tedious document review that Madison discovered a small digital recorder tucked inside an old jewelry box that Patricia used to store important papers. Curious about why a recording device would be hidden among legal documents, Madison turned it on and pressed play. Patricia's voice filled the small office with crystal clarity, speaking to what was obviously her attorney during a strategy session. But the words Madison heard bore no resemblance to the story Patricia had been telling her children for years. "Of course I took Jonathan's money," Patricia's recorded voice said with casual indifference. "That's what the trust fund was for, wasn't it? To give me resources to invest in the children who actually had potential? I never told him about the inheritance because he would have wasted it on his little hobbies and stupid dreams." Madison's hands trembled as she listened to her mother continue. "The gambling story was brilliant. Don't you think Madison and Tyler believed every word of it? They actually feel sorry for him now, which keeps them from asking too many questions about where their tuition money came from." The recording captured Patricia laughing at her own deception, a sound that made Madison's stomach turn with revulsion. But there was more, and it got progressively worse. "Madison and Tyler are useful idiots, really. They never question anything as long as they're comfortable. I tell them Jonathan is irresponsible and they believe it. I give them expensive gifts with his money and they think I'm generous. It's almost too easy to manipulate them when they want to believe they're special." Madison listened in horror as Patricia continued outlining her strategy for maintaining control over the family narrative. The woman on the recording expressed genuine satisfaction at keeping me in my place while ensuring that her real favorites got the good life they deserved. "Jonathan has always been too independent for his own good," Patricia's voice explained. "His father spoiled him with all that nonsense about following his dreams and building something meaningful. I've spent years teaching him that he's not as special as he thought, and it's finally working. He accepts scraps now and feels grateful for them." The recording also revealed information that Madison had never known about our family dynamics. Patricia admitted to intercepting birthday and Christmas cards I had sent to my siblings over the years, preventing them from receiving my attempts at maintaining our relationships. She had systematically isolated me from Madison and Tyler while convincing them that I was the one pulling away. Madison's shock turned to rage as the full scope of our mother's manipulation became clear. Everything she had believed about our family relationships was based on carefully orchestrated lies. The recording contained nearly an hour of Patricia discussing her strategies for managing her children's perceptions and maintaining her position as the family's moral authority. Unable to process the revelation alone, Madison immediately called Tyler and insisted he come over immediately. She played the recording for him without explanation, watching his face transform from confusion to disbelief to fury as Patricia's true thoughts filled the room. "She's been lying to us about everything," Tyler said when the recording finally ended, his voice barely above a whisper. "Jonathan never had gambling problems. She made all of that up to justify stealing his inheritance." Madison was crying by then, overwhelmed by guilt and anger in equal measure. "We participated in this Tyler. We took his money and felt good about it because we thought we were protecting him from himself. We believed her lies and treated him like he was damaged." They spent the next 2 hours listening to the recording, repeatedly trying to understand how they had been so thoroughly deceived. The evidence of Patricia's manipulation was overwhelming, but it also forced them to confront uncomfortable truths about their own willingness to accept a narrative that benefited them financially. The siblings realized that they had never seriously questioned why their mother could afford such expensive gifts or educational expenses on her modest income. They had wanted to believe in her generosity and their own special status within the family, which made them perfect targets for her deception. Armed with this explosive evidence, Madison and Tyler drove directly to Patricia's house for a confrontation that had been building for years without them realizing it. They found her in the living room, watching television and enjoying a glass of wine as if she didn't have a care in the world. "We found your recording," Madison announced, placing the device on the coffee table between them. Patricia's composure cracked immediately. The wine glass slipped from her fingers, staining the expensive carpet that my inheritance money had purchased. For the first time in memory, she was completely speechless, caught off guard by evidence she had forgotten existed. "You called us useful idiots," Tyler said, his voice thick with hurt and betrayal. "You laughed about how easy it was to manipulate us into believing Jonathan was the problem." Patricia tried to rally her usual tactics, claiming the recording was taken out of context and that she had been speaking hypothetically about family dynamics. But her children had heard too much truth to be swayed by more lies. "You stole his inheritance and convinced us he was irresponsible," Madison said, her voice gaining strength as she spoke. "You intercepted his birthday cards and made us think he didn't care about maintaining relationships. You turned us against our own brother with lies." The confrontation lasted for over 2 hours with Patricia, alternately denying, justifying, and minimizing her actions. She tried to maintain that everything she had done was in the family's best interests, but the recording made it impossible to claim good intentions. Finally faced with undeniable evidence of her manipulation, Patricia broke down and admitted the scope of her deception. She begged Madison and Tyler not to abandon her, promising to make amends and restore the family relationships she had damaged. But her children were too disgusted by years of calculated manipulation to be swayed by tears and promises. That evening, Madison called me for the first time in over 2 months. Her voice was shaky with emotion as she asked if she could come over to my apartment immediately. When I agreed, she arrived with Tyler and the recording that would change everything about our family dynamics. Listening to my mother's casual dismissal of my worth and her proud description of the strategies she used to diminish me was one of the most painful experiences of my life. But it was also liberating. Every doubt I had harbored about my own perceptions was erased by the clear evidence of Patricia's manipulation. Madison and Tyler spent that night apologizing repeatedly, trying to make amends for years of treating me as the family disappointment while enjoying luxury funded by my stolen inheritance. They offered to immediately return every penny they could from the gifts and opportunities Patricia had given them using my money. For the first time in years, I felt like I had my siblings back. The relief was overwhelming, but it was also complicated by sadness about the years we had lost to our mother's lies. The family I thought I had lost was actually being kept from me through deliberate manipulation, and recovering those relationships required confronting the damage that had been done to all of us. With Madison and Tyler's testimony and the recording as evidence, my legal case became completely unwinnable for Patricia. Her attorney immediately recommended settlement to avoid both civil judgment and criminal prosecution. The truth had finally emerged, but its power to heal was matched only by its capacity to destroy the fiction that had held our family together for so many years. Patricia's capitulation came swiftly, once Madison and Tyler made it clear they would testify against her in court. Theodore Blackwood, her expensive attorney, requested an emergency meeting with Sarah and me, explaining that his client was now willing to discuss settlement terms to avoid a public trial. The meeting took place in Sarah's conference room on a gray Thursday morning that felt heavy with the weight of years of deception finally being exposed. Patricia arrived looking haggard and defeated, a stark contrast to the confident woman who had dismissed my concerns just months earlier. Her designer clothes couldn't hide the toll that fighting an unwinnable case had taken on her. My client acknowledges that certain financial transactions may have been inappropriate. Theodore began carefully, and she's prepared to make restitution to avoid prolonged litigation. Sarah wasn't interested in euphemisms or face-saving language. Your client systematically stole $300,000 from my client's trust fund over a period of 3 years. We're not here to discuss inappropriate transactions. We're here to discuss criminal theft and fraud. The initial settlement demand was straightforward return the stolen $300,000, plus 3 years of accrued interest at market rates, bringing the total to $412,000. Additionally, Patricia would need to pay fair market rent for the years she had been living in the house that legally belonged to my trust. But Sarah's investigation had uncovered one final shocking revelation that made the settlement negotiations far more complex than anyone had anticipated. During her forensic review of the trust fund documentation, she discovered that the family home had been purchased using money from my inheritance shortly after my father's death. The deed shows that this property is held in trust for Jonathan. Sarah announced sliding copies of the property records across the conference table. Mrs. Cooper has been living rent-free in her son's house for 5 years while systematically stealing from his trust fund. Patricia's face went white as the implications became clear. Not only had she stolen my inheritance money, but she had been illegally occupying my property while claiming ownership. The house she considered her sanctuary and symbol of maternal authority was actually mine, purchased with the inheritance she had been systematically looting. Theodore examined the property documents with growing concern, realizing that his client's legal position had become completely untenable. Patricia didn't just owe me money, she owed me rent for years of unauthorized occupation, plus immediate possession of property that legally belonged to me. The financial mathematics were devastating for Patricia. Beyond the $400,000 in stolen inheritance funds, she owed approximately $60,000 in back rent, calculated at fair market rates for the 5-bedroom house. The total settlement demand approached $500,000 money she simply didn't possess. Patricia's only significant asset was the house itself, which she would have to forfeit immediately since it legally belonged to my trust. Her retirement savings jewelry and other personal property would need to be liquidated to pay as much of the settlement as possible, with the remainder structured as monthly payments over several years. The most emotionally satisfying aspect of the settlement was watching Patricia realize that she would have to move out of the house immediately. The home where she had hosted Christmas dinners while giving me expired coupons, where she had planned strategies for maintaining her manipulation, where she had felt secure in her position as family matriarch, was actually my property that she had been illegally occupying. Madison and Tyler insisted on contributing to their mother's settlement payments despite my protests that they were also victims of her deception. Madison returned her car and gave me the $8,000 that had been budgeted for her Paris trip, explaining that she couldn't enjoy a vacation funded by stolen money. Tyler sold his Rolex and his truck, contributing over $15,000 to help repay the inheritance money that had been used for his education and down payment. Both siblings found second jobs to help pay additional monthly installments toward Patricia's debt. Their willingness to sacrifice their own comfort to help correct our mother's theft meant more to me than the money itself. For the first time in years, I felt like we were truly a family united by honesty rather than divided by manipulation. The tax fraud investigation resulted in additional penalties that compounded Patricia's financial distress. The IRS imposed substantial fines for unreported gift taxes, plus interest that had been accumulating for years. She avoided criminal prosecution only by cooperating fully with the investigation and agreeing to a structured payment plan that would keep her under financial monitoring for the next decade. Patricia was forced to move into a 1-bedroom apartment across town and take a job at a department store to meet her settlement obligations. The woman, who had once acted like a queen, dispensing favors to her children, was now working retail to pay back the son she had treated like a failure. The irony was not lost on any of us. Moving into the family home felt strange at first, surrounded by memories of childhood dinners and holiday celebrations that now carried the bitter knowledge of how they had been funded. But I also found comfort in my father's presence throughout the house. His books were still on the shelves, his tools remained organized in the garage, and his careful attention to creating a comfortable family environment was evident in every room. Reading through papers my father had left in his study, I discovered notes about his decision to purchase the house specifically for my future. He had written that he wanted to give me a foundation to build my life on a place where I could feel secure and connected to family history. Patricia's theft hadn't just taken my money. It had delayed my father's final gift by 5 years. The settlement also revealed the full scope of Patricia's deception about family finances. Every major purchase my siblings had enjoyed, every educational opportunity they had received, every comfort they had taken for granted, had been funded by money that was legally mine. The expensive kitchen renovation, the new appliances, even the landscaping improvements had all been paid for with my inheritance. As the legal proceedings concluded, I experienced a complex mixture of emotions that surprised me with their intensity. Justice had been served and my inheritance recovered, but I felt no satisfaction in Patricia's downfall. The victory was hollow because it had required destroying the family relationships I had spent years trying to understand and repair. The woman who had raised me, who had taught me to ride a bicycle and helped me with homework, had also systematically robbed me, while poisoning my relationships with my siblings. The cognitive dissonance was almost impossible to process, leaving me with a sense of loss that went far beyond the financial theft. But there was also hope emerging from the wreckage of our family's deception. Madison and Tyler's willingness to sacrifice their own comfort to help repay my stolen inheritance demonstrated a capacity for growth and genuine care that had been hidden beneath years of manipulation. We were slowly learning to relate to each other as equals, rather than as characters in Patricia's carefully scripted family drama. The settlement marked the end of one chapter in our family's story, but the beginning of another that would be written without lies, manipulation, or artificial hierarchies. It would take time to build trust and genuine relationships, but for the first time in years that prospect felt possible rather than hopeless. 6 months after the settlement was finalized, I stood in the kitchen of my childhood home, preparing Sunday dinner for Madison and Tyler. The irony wasn't lost on me that I was now hosting family gatherings in the same space where Patricia had once given me expired coupons, while my own inheritance funded everyone else's prosperity. But the atmosphere was completely different now, filled with genuine warmth instead of manipulative theater. The transformation in my life had been remarkable and unexpected. Living in the house my father had intended for me brought a sense of stability and connection that I had never experienced during my years of financial struggle. His presence seemed to permeate every room, from his carefully organized workshop in the basement to his collection of classic literature that still lined the study walls. Using part of my recovered inheritance, I had paid off my crushing student loans and started a business that grew directly from my painful experience with family financial manipulation. Family Financial Mediation offered services to families dealing with money disputes, helping them resolve conflicts before they escalated to legal battles that could destroy relationships permanently. The business concept had emerged from countless conversations with Sarah about how family money conflicts typically develop. Most cases she handled involved years of miscommunication, unspoken expectations, and gradually building resentments that eventually exploded into lawsuits. My unique perspective as someone who had lived through both the manipulation and the legal resolution gave me insights that traditional financial advisors lacked. My first client was a widow whose adult children were fighting over their father's estate, each convinced that their siblings were being greedy or unfair. Using techniques I had learned from my own family's healing process, I helped them have honest conversations about their financial expectations and emotional needs. The mediation session prevented a lawsuit and restored relationships that had been damaged by months of suspicion and accusation. Word spread quickly through legal and financial networks about the effectiveness of my approach. Within 3 months, I had a steady stream of referrals from attorneys who preferred helping families avoid litigation rather than profiting from their conflicts. The emotional rewards of helping families heal were matched by financial success that finally gave me the security I had worked toward for so many years. Madison had undergone her own transformation during this period, using the guilt and insight from discovering Patricia's deception as motivation for personal growth. She enrolled in a social work program to learn about family systems and emotional manipulation, determined to help other families recognize and address the kind of toxic dynamics we had endured for years. Her decision not to take the Paris vacation had been difficult initially, but she channeled that disappointment into intensive therapy focused on understanding how she had been manipulated and how to avoid similar patterns in her own relationships. The process was painful but ultimately liberating, helping her develop genuine confidence instead of the artificial validation Patricia had provided through stolen money and false narratives. Tyler's journey was more straightforward, but equally meaningful. Returning to community college to finish his degree without any financial assistance from family members had been a proud choice that demonstrated his commitment to personal integrity. He worked construction during the day and attended classes at night, earning grades that reflected his actual effort rather than his mother's financial support. The Sunday dinners we shared in my father's house became a healing ritual that slowly rebuilt our relationships on foundations of honesty and mutual respect. We talked openly about our childhood experiences, recognizing signs of Patricia's manipulation that we had missed at the time. These conversations were often painful, but consistently healing, allowing us to understand each other as real people rather than characters in our mother's family drama. Patricia maintained minimal contact with all 3 of her children during this period. She sent occasional birthday cards and brief text messages, but the relationships remained strained by her continued refusal to acknowledge the full scope of her manipulation. The few conversations we had were cordial, but distant, marked by her inability to move beyond viewing herself as the victim of ungrateful children rather than the perpetrator of systematic financial and emotional abuse. I didn't hate her, which surprised me more than any other aspect of this entire experience. The anger and betrayal I had felt during the confrontation and legal proceedings had gradually evolved into something more complex sadness for the woman who had chosen manipulation over genuine connection and regret for the family relationships that had been poisoned by her need for control. The most healing moment in my recovery process came when I discovered a letter my father had written to me shortly before his death, hidden in his desk drawer, beneath years of accumulated papers and forgotten documents. The letter explained his concerns about Patricia's favoritism and his specific intention that my inheritance should provide me with independence and opportunities. Jonathan. His familiar handwriting began, "If you're reading this, then I'm gone, and you've probably discovered some difficult truths about our family. Your mother means well, but she has always struggled with treating all her children equally. This inheritance is my way of ensuring that you have the resources to build whatever life you choose, regardless of anyone else's opinions about what you should become." The letter continued for 2 pages, expressing his pride in my work ethic and character, while acknowledging that I had always been different from Madison and Tyler, in ways that sometimes made Patricia uncomfortable. He wrote that he was proudest of my independence and integrity qualities that would serve me well, regardless of whatever challenges I might face. Reading my father's words of love and confidence helped me finally release the years of feeling inadequate and unloved that Patricia's manipulation had created. His true gift hadn't been the money itself, but the validation that I was valued and believed in by the parent whose opinion mattered most to me. My business continued growing as I developed a reputation for helping families navigate complex financial relationships with empathy and practical wisdom. Each case reinforced the central lesson I had learned from my own experience. Money problems in families are usually symptoms of deeper issues around communication, respect, and genuine care for each other's well-being. One particularly meaningful case involved a young man whose parents were threatening to disinherit him for choosing a career in art instead of business. The family dynamics were hauntingly familiar with parents using financial control to manipulate their adult child's life choices. Through careful mediation, we helped them recognize that their love for their son was more important than their disappointment in his career path. The case ended with the parents establishing a modest trust fund to support their son's artistic development, while he agreed to maintain regular communication about his progress and financial stability. The compromise protected both the young man's independence and his parents' need to feel connected to his success. As I hosted another Sunday dinner for Madison and Tyler, now joined by their romantic partners who had become part of our reconstructed family circle, I reflected on the journey from that devastating Christmas morning to this moment of genuine connection and shared purpose. The gifts we exchanged now were modest but thoughtful, chosen with care rather than dollar amounts. The conversation was authentic and warm, filled with laughter about shared memories and plans for the future that we were building together. Madison talked about her progress in social work school, Tyler shared updates about his final semester before graduation, and I described my latest successful mediation case. Looking around the dining room table at my siblings and their partners, I realized that Patricia's betrayal, while devastating at the time, had ultimately forced us to discover our own strength and develop genuine relationships based on honesty rather than manipulation. The pain of discovery had led to truth, and truth had created space for real love to grow. As we cleared dishes and prepared to spend the evening playing board games and watching movies, I thought about the life lesson that had emerged from this entire experience. Sometimes the people who hurt us the most are the ones who inadvertently force us to discover our own resilience and capacity for healing. Real family isn't about money or expensive gifts. It's about honesty, respect, and choosing to love each other despite our flaws and mistakes. When we stop accepting manipulation and demand authenticity in our relationships, we create opportunities for genuine connections to develop. The process is often painful and sometimes requires difficult choices, but the resulting relationships are stronger and more meaningful than anything built on lies or artificial foundations. My father's inheritance had been about more than financial security. It was about giving me the independence and resources to build a life based on my own values and choices. Patricia's theft had delayed that gift, but couldn't destroy its ultimate purpose, helping me become the person I was meant to be. Now, as I watch my siblings thrive in their own pursuits, while we maintain genuine connections built on mutual respect and shared honesty, I realized that the greatest inheritance wasn't money at all. It was learning that we have the power to choose which relationships to accept and which behaviors to tolerate. When we demand better treatment and refuse to accept manipulation, we open ourselves to the kind of authentic love that makes all the struggle worthwhile. Have you ever discovered that someone you trusted was manipulating your relationships or taking advantage of your generosity? How did you find the courage to confront the truth and rebuild your life on honest foundations? I'd love to hear your experiences in the comments below. Because healing from betrayal is a journey that's easier when we know we're not alone. If this story resonated with you, please like this video and subscribe to hear more stories about overcoming family conflicts and building genuine relationships. Share this with someone who might need to hear that it's possible to break free from manipulation and create the authentic connections we all deserve. Thank you for listening to my story, and I hope it helps you find the courage to demand the honesty and respect you deserve in your own relationships.